Hello from East Aurora, which today we're calling Lake Effect Country. Hi folks, Robert Lowell Goller here, and thank you for joining me for our weekly chats about local history. In honor of our Lake Effect snow, which we're digging ourselves out of this morning, we got hit pretty hard here in East Aurora. I want to share with you a article from a Buffalo newspaper in November 1900. They talked about East Aurora. It was one of those epic November storms. November storms are not new to Western New York, and this was November of 1900. And the report in the Buffalo newspaper said that East Aurora got 5 feet of snow pretty quickly over a short period of time. East Aurora had 5 feet of snow. Medina had rapid snow up toward Batavia, Medina. Orchard Park, same thing. Maybe not 5 feet of snow, but a lot of snow in this November storm. However, the news report said that Olean and south of Arcade got 1 inch. And Buffalo got only a couple inches in this storm. Does that sound familiar? Yeah, it's lake effect snow. And even though that November 1900 news report did not use the term lake effect snow, it certainly was lake effect snow. And interestingly, old news reports would not have used the term lake effect snow because it's a fairly new term. Even though the phenomena has been around a while, the term actually only goes back about 60 years to 1966, and it was Robert Sykes, a professor at SUNY Oswego, who is credited with coming up with that term. He studied the lake effect snow coming off of Lake Ontario. We'd known about the phenomena. The meteorologists have known about the phenomena for since the 1800s when they started studying the weather. But the term is fairly new, and he is the one credited with coining the term, and he was studying the snow coming off of Lake Ontario and those really narrow snow bands. We hear about lake effect snow all the time. You hear Andy Parker talking on his social media pages and the television meteorologists talking about lake effect snow bands, and we hear it all the time. But before 1966, you would not have heard that term because that's when it was coined, that term, to describe it. However, lake effect snow has been happening long before we even came here. The Great Lakes were formed, of course, well before humans came here to Western New York. And the snow dumping, we know what it is. We're used to it here. The snow coming, the Arctic air coming over, cold air coming over the Great Lakes, the warm Great Lakes, unfrozen Great Lakes, and dumping snow in very narrow bands where the wind pushes it, and dumping it on it. We know that phenomena today, but in the early days, perhaps they did not know it because they didn't have a term, lake effect, so 1966. But if you're looking through old news reports, you may have to do a little more investigating to figure out if it's lake effect snow. So in this news report from November 1900, they were talking about Jamestown and Chautauqua County getting very little snow, and Buffalo getting a few inches, and East Aurora getting 5 feet. And if you kind of map that out, you can figure out that's classic lake effect snow, even though they didn't put that term in the news report. So you won't see the term lake effect snow if you're doing any research into history, into weather, or you have old clippings in your family files and they're talking about massive snowstorms. You won't see that term. Does not mean it was not a lake effect event. So lake effect's been around a while. Wasn't always called lake effect snow. But so the weather hasn't changed. The lakes have always been there, at least while humans have been here. But we've changed how we react to the snow and how we can predict the snow. I found it very interesting. As many of you know, I've studied a lot of weather history, and I've written about it quite a bit, done a couple videos about November storms and winter snowstorms, and how things haven't really changed a whole lot. I'm working on, as you know, some more book projects, and there's going to be a whole chapter in an upcoming book about weather, because we always like to talk about weather. That's not a new thing either. Humans have always wanted to talk about weather. It's something we can all relate to, and we can all kind of find common ground about complaining about the weather, or just talking about the weather in general. And how we've changed how we predict the weather has rapidly changed. Back in 1900, they would not have known it was coming. The radar we have today, of course, the weather people get a lot of flack for being wrong, quote unquote, but they're right. Quite a bit because of the technology that we have. This storm we knew. You saw those weather maps, those colored weather maps that came out, brightly colored weather maps that showed the storm, the bulk of it hitting Orchard Park, Hamburg, East Aurora, and guess what it did? It did that, and it's still doing that today. They would not have had that back 100 years ago, even 50 years ago, to have that prediction in those weather maps. They wouldn't know it was coming. But it was lake effect nonetheless, whether they could tell it was coming or not. Our cell phones, being able to take photographs, and social media, we know in real time. We're seeing videos today. You can see behind me in East Aurora. That would not have happened 100 years ago. You would have gotten weather reports about how many inches of snow, but the real time, how's the weather, how are the roads, all that, that is fairly new. And today we have the technology to communicate that a lot better than our forefathers and mothers would have had even 50 and 100 years ago. And so that's rapidly changed how we react to the weather and how we can predict the weather. In fact, I had talked about in previous videos about plowing snow. They didn't start plowing most roads until the 1920s. Buffalo would be cut off unless you were on the railroad. You wouldn't drive into Buffalo. A lot of people would sleigh. They would get the sleigh out rather than a wagon or a horse-drawn carriage, and you would sleigh. It would be great sleighing weather, they would say in the newspaper reports. So how we live today and how we react to the weather is much, much different, and how it's predicted. And one of the things 100 years ago that I found interesting, 120 years ago, is yes, they had reports, news reports, and they would telegraph those news reports to the newspapers, and they would know how many inches of snow fell in Olean versus how many inches of snow fell in East Aurora and Buffalo. And that's how we know. One way we know that it's lake effect snow, even though they didn't call it that in the newspapers of yesteryear. Another thing is the railroads, and where the railroads, the reports of where the trains had to stop. This 1900 storm in November of 1900, more evidence that it was lake effect was the trains got stopped in Arcade, and they got stopped north of East Aurora, north of Springbrook, and everywhere else the trains were running, and they just got stopped. They couldn't go any further north from Arcade and further south from Springbrook. So that's how we know it was a fairly narrow band of lake effect snow, even though they didn't call it that. So lake effect's been around for a very, very long time, forever since the Great Lakes have been formed, but we haven't called it lake effect for very long, actually only the past 60 years or so, interestingly coined by Robert Sykes, a professor at SUNY Oswego in 1966, coincidentally 2026. We're talking about a lake effect snow event here in East Aurora. So again, thank you for joining me for our weekly chats about local history. If you are new to my videos, I do post a new video each Tuesday in which I answer your questions about local history. So if you have a question or a comment, either pop it in the comments or send me a private message. I do enjoy the ideas that you send forward. And I am Robert Lowell Goller. I am the town and village historian, but these videos and my book projects, stay tuned for more weather chapters in the upcoming books. These projects are not officially affiliated with my duties as town and village historian. So from a snowy East Aurora, thank you for keeping history alive, and we'll see you next time. Take care.